Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2017, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of my special order.
No objection.
Mr. Speaker, 10 months ago, I was pleased to welcome David Pulfus, a very talented young constituent of mine from St. Louis, to the U.S. Capitol complex as we unveiled his painting entitled Untitled Number 1, which you see here tonight. David's work was the unanimous first place winner in the annual Congressional art competition in Missouri's 1st Congressional District. And I have been pleased to sponsor this competition in St. Louis for the last 16 years without interruption and incident. For those of you who may not know, many other members of Congress conduct this contest in their district as well. In fact, this painting was one of more than 400 student entries from across the nation that were reviewed, accepted, and approved last June for public display in the Cannon Tunnel. By the architect of the Capitol, members of Congress do not select the artists. We do not approve or disapprove of any of the artistic concepts, and we have no role in judging the competition. We simply provide a public forum for the most talented young artists in our districts to display their winning artwork in the U.S. Capitol complex, yet without cause or reasonable process, and after being viewed repeatedly by members of Congress, congressional staffers, and thousands of visitors without incident or concern, my constituent's winning entry was removed in an act of politically motivated, unconstitutional, retroactive censorship. That injustice was initiated by pressure from certain alternative right bloggers and Mr. Eric Bolling, a host on Fox News Channel, who created a mean-spirited and factually inaccurate media campaign to improve his ratings on the back of a young man, and to ultimately force the painting to be removed by the architect of the Capitol after repeated acts of petty theft by renegade members of Congress who removed the painting without any authorization, and after a storm of right-wing media pressure, the Speaker of the House forced the architect of the Capitol to trample on the rights of my constituent by ruling that this painting, which he had already approved 10 months ago, was retroactively disqualified. This unwarranted, arbitrary, and unconstitutional act of censorship will not stand. Now, let me be clear. I do not approve or disapprove of this painting. I did not approve or disapprove the concept of the artwork. I did not judge the competition, but the architect of the Capitol reviewed, approved, and accepted this student artwork for public display without incident, comment, or concern. Just like every other entry, this is displayed in this public exhibition, and only after the most hateful, intolerant, and reckless media campaign combined with enormous political pressure from the Speaker and other members, the architect of the Capitol miraculously traveled back in time to disqualify the very same painting that he had approved 10 months ago. Perhaps we should advise the National Academy of Sciences of the architect of the Capitol's newfound ability to bend the space-time continuum in order to retroactively respond to the most extreme voices in the majority, so that they could more easily suppress the rights of my young constituent. And it did great harm to an innocent young man who tried to do the right thing. Because of this outrageous act of censorship, David Pulfus has been subjected to the most vile, racist, and hateful attacks on social media and on talk radio. He has also been deprived of the honor of listing his first-place victory in the Congressional art competition on his resume. He has even been attacked by the Speaker of the House, who called his award-winning work disgusting. So on top of depriving David of his First Amendment rights, the majority and the architect of the Capitol have placed a terrible personal burden on this bright, talented young man. David does not deserve that. That's wrong, that's totally unacceptable, and the Speaker and the architect of the Capitol should be ashamed of themselves. This shameful decision also sent a chilling message to young Americans. It told young Americans that their views are not valued, their voices are not respected, their creativity and passions are not welcome. And that, sadly, here in the People's House, their First Amendment rights are no longer protected. That's a terrible precedent to set for future generations who look to us to defend their freedoms. So, my friends, this is really not about a student art competition anymore. It's about defending the Constitution. It is just pathetic that some Republican members and alt-right media types who constantly refer to themselves as constitutional conservatives don't think that that same document protects the fundamental free speech rights of my young constituent. In a minute. You can be certain that I will fight to defend this young man's right to express himself, because his artwork is true for him, and he is entitled to that protection under the law. I yield to my friend.
I want to thank him for his discussion here. I think it's courageous and necessary. To begin with, the painting's removal by the architect of the Capitol was an infringement on the free speech rights of the artist and on the Congressman yourself, Mr. Clay from Missouri. Because the First Amendment of the United States Constitution provides that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. And it is undisputed that the First Amendment's free speech guarantee extends to artistic expression, including visual arts. And this is true even when such expression may be offensive to many people or to some people. And so while members who removed the artist's painting may have acted based on their belief that the artwork's viewpoint was offensive, that belief cannot trump the free speech rights of the artist and of you yourself, Congressman Clay. And I congratulate you for putting this discussion into the record.
And I thank my friend from Michigan, the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. And at this time, I want to yield to my friend, an art education PhD, a gallery owner and artist and member of the Congressional Art Caucus, the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams.
Thank you very much. I want to, first of all, thank my colleague from Missouri, Representative Clay, for his concern, for his courage, and for standing up and speaking up to ensure that his constituents and others' First Amendment rights are protected by this Congress, and for organizing this special order hour this evening. I appreciate very much the opportunity to join Representative Clay, and I proudly stand with him and my other colleagues to speak in defense of the First Amendment rights afforded to citizens of the Constitution of the United States. As a 12th District representative from North Carolina, as a practicing professional artist and art educator, as a curator, as a retired 40-year college arts professor, I'm pleased to join with Representative Clay in expressing my support for freedom of visual expression and creativity, especially when it comes to supporting talented young students. I've learned through my professional arts education and management careers that, yes, the arts are nice, but beyond being nice, they're absolutely necessary and essential in helping enrich our lives. The arts are unique to our being, and they are what make us human. Artists connect the past to the present. They convey our unique experiences, and they are presented in many forms, sometimes familiar, other times unfamiliar. The arts are a universal language that speak to people everywhere to help them to understand diversity and cultures and some of the most complicated of issues. Therefore, having the freedom to make art is essential to creative expression. Freedom of expression is everyone's freedom. And our founding fathers enshrined the freedoms of speech and expression in all forms, in music and written and spoken word and theater, and through visual imagery and composition in the Bill of Rights. And under the First Amendment, all art forms and all artistic expressions are constitutionally protected. Our founding fathers that created our country and launched our nation as the world's role model in democracy believed that freedom of speech and freedom of the press were important enough to guarantee protection in our country's founding documents. And if our founding fathers, the brightest minds of that generation, thought that artistic expression was important enough to protect in our Bill of Rights, then what right do we have to take this away and censor the artistic community? To quote the ACLU, a free society is based on the principle that each and every individual has the right to decide what art or entertainment he or she wants or does not want to receive or create. And once you allow the government to censor someone else, you cede to it the power to censor you or something like you. Censorship is like poison gas, a powerful weapon that can harm you when the wind shifts. As a nation, we face many threats, both internally and externally. We're a nation of diverse thought and diverse people and strong, diverse principles. However, when we stand by and we allow our artistic community to be censored or allow threats to silence our press, we become our own greatest threat. And when we reject facts and censor artistic expression just because it makes us uncomfortable or because we don't like it, we're becoming the tyrants that our founding fathers risked their lives to protect and escape from. And so the question of what's appropriate art is not a new question. Since the beginning of our country, our citizens have wrestled with what to do when they're offended by a work of art or any form. Court case after court case has tested governmental censorship of artistic expression, and the Supreme Court has continued to uphold our founding principles of freedom of expression and speech. And in the 1931 case, Stromberg versus California, the Supreme Court ruled that symbolic speech is protected by the First Amendment. And so the ruling ensured that all art forms, music and paintings and plays and other artistic expressions are protected by the First Amendment. And in the 1982 decision, the Board of Education versus PICO, the Supreme Court ruled that local school boards may not remove books from school library shelves simply because they dislike the ideas contained in those books. And like the removal of the books from libraries, the removal of Mr. Pulpus's painting was a blatant violation of his First Amendment rights. The First Amendment guarantees that our government cannot make substantive decisions about the content of a work of art. Expression can only be limited if and only if that expression will cause direct and imminent harm, such as yelling fire in a crowded theater. Our government's role is not to censor, but to ensure that artists are able to freely express themselves without fear of censorship. And our government did not protect this young man's First Amendment rights. Instead, it acted as a retroactive censor on his work. Here is an example of our government making a decision based on content they disapproved of and preventing this work because of its subject and because some legislators weren't knowledgeable enough about it to understand it from being displayed in a public place. Justice Louis Brandeis, in his defense of free speech, wrote that it is hazardous to discourage thought and hope and imagination, that fear breeds repression, and that repression breeds hate, and that hate menaces stable government. The path to safety lies in the opportunity to discuss freely supposed grievances and proposed remedies. Justice Brandeis' words were written in 1927, 90 years ago, almost a century, but they still echo true today. Censorship out of fear, out of misunderstanding or pain or dislike of a work is fundamentally anti-American and unconstitutional. For more than 4 decades as a visual arts professor, I taught my students that you're going to see a lot of art throughout your lifetime. Some images you like and some you won't especially like, and some will be disturbing and some confusing. But I reminded my students that their responsibility as viewers was to make every attempt to be able to say that you don't like it because you at least understand it. Mr. Speaker, knowledge is power. And Mr. Pulpit's work did not create direct or imminent harm, but his work did depict an uncomfortable reality that's pervasive across our country. Unfortunately, violence is a way of life in many communities throughout America. As a matter of fact, it's too prevalent. But for this young man, violence in his community was a life that he knew most of his life. It was a life he was intrinsically, as an artist, compelled to visually talk about on his canvas. As a matter of fact, he had a right to talk about it, and in reality, he needed to talk about it, and I admire him for his courage. And as a teacher, I can tell you that visually, his utilization of compositional elements and principles and forms showed an extraordinary talent. From my estimation, we failed as viewers to do our part, and we didn't make an effort to really see, but we just merely looked at the work. But most especially, we didn't seize the opportunity to learn so that we could enhance our capacity to build and reinforce positive relationships in our communities. This painting offered us a chance to have a real conversation about race and police and community violence and institutional racism. But instead of seizing this opportunity, we have to continue to fight to protect this young artist's First Amendment rights. Heated debate and discussion is the hallmark of our democracy. However, when arguments are censored, when artists are told what they are able to produce, when expression is silenced and our democracy is then threatened. And since this incident, as you've heard, the Congressional Institute has changed the rules for the Congressional art competition. Works submitted to the competition depicting contemporary political, controversial, or sensational or gruesome nature are not allowed. But I'm not here to criticize the work of the Congressional Institute, but as a professional artist myself, only to ask this question: what benefit can come from limiting our young artists from creating? Our democracy works when people stay engaged, when people participate, but by censoring what's in our public spaces, we're creating barriers for political discourse, and we're creating fear of retaliation. Artists are visual storytellers, and we're entrusted with a unique responsibility to use the power of the arts to inform, to educate, and to empower our communities. Noted African-American artist and scholar Dr. Samela Lewis of California said that African-American artists have a primary obligation to community, to understand and to use the elements of their cultural heritage to produce an art that's diverse, reflecting our diverse interests and materials and techniques, and to communicate those messages to the audiences that we want to reach. So removing this young man's work was a degrading and insensitive action, which signaled to this young, aspiring, gifted student that his work is valueless, that his story not worthy to be told. But most especially, it put into question the right and the responsibility that he has as an artist to express himself through visual imagery and symbolic competition. It's not up to the government to decide what work has value or whose story should be told. The removal of Mr. Pulfus's work sets a dangerous precedent. And Congress is now making content decisions on works displayed in the U.S. Capitol and is limiting what types of art will be exhibited. To some, this issue may not seem important, but the scope of the actions that have taken place in the U.S. Capitol is tremendous. Just because somebody's sensibility is offended doesn't give that person the right to ban or censor a work. In fact, the First Amendment prevents that. However, as this gross overreach of power in removing his work, just because the Constitution prevents something doesn't always mean that it won't happen. But it is our duty to hold our government responsible for protecting the sanctity of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And that's why I'm honored as a 40-year arts educator, as a member of the Congressional Art Caucus, and as a professional artist, to join Representative Clay and all of my colleagues in speaking today about the importance of the First Amendment as it relates to the creative and the professional obligations and rights of the visual artists. And I yield back, and I thank you very much.
And let me thank the gentlewoman from North Carolina for her thoughts, her words, as well as her expertise in the field of art. She is probably the only qualified art critic serving in Congress today. So thank you so much. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I want to yield to my friend and attorney and former legal advisor to the Memphis Police Department, the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Clay, and I indeed also enjoyed the remarks that were just preceded me and that Mr. Conyers made and you made concerning this issue. I rise today in support of art, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, but also Black Lives Matter and police officers who follow the rules, which 98% or more do, who treat citizens appropriately and risk their lives to keep us safe. And I mourn each officer that loses their life or is injured in protecting us and having ordered liberty. But I rise in opposition to censorship, which is anathema to me, and police officers who go beyond the law, that small percentage that do, and soil the badge they wear, and use deadly force inappropriately, which has occurred too many times. Sometimes because they just don't react properly in the heat of battle, sometimes for other reasons. Too often upon black people, which does tend to indicate a prejudice that exists in certain people's minds. Black lives do matter, and people haven't recognized that, and we need to. The removal of David Pulpus's painting from the Cannon Tunnel is troubling on many levels. It raises serious questions about Congress's commitment to the First Amendment, which guarantees the freedom of expression. And we take an oath to support the Constitution and should do so in our actions as well as our words, as well as in our oath. Benjamin Franklin warned us, freedom of speech is a principal pillar of a free government. And when this support is taken away, the Constitution of a free society is dissolved. Secondly, it raises serious questions about censorship. Unfortunately, in my hometown of Memphis, we have a history that's sometimes not so good on particular cases of race and free expression. That long history of artistic censorship, oftentimes related to race as well as sex, and for nearly 3 decades in the early part of the 20th century, Memphis had a censor, a public censor appointed by the government named Lloyd T. Benford. He served as the chairman of the Memphis Board of Censors, and they banned movies. They banned movies like Curly in the 1940s because it showed white and black children in school together. He prevented Memphians from seeing major celebrities like Lena Horne, Duke Ellington, Nat Cole, King Cole, Cab Calloway in our local movie theaters. He was a racist. Benfordizing became a word, artistic words that were wrong, and Congress must be ever mindful of the slippery slope of censorship. Thirdly, and perhaps most important, this painting raises serious questions about public policy. Congress should be debating questions of public policy, not banning expressions of them. The events that took place in Ferguson, Missouri, which are well expressed by this painting, were a wake-up call to many in our nation about police use of deadly force and injustices in our inner cities and turmoil rising in our inner cities. Sobering questions about the fairness of our criminal justice system and about race were raised. And a painting such as this that reflects those issues is most appropriate for display in the hallway where these paintings and artworks are shown, because it is representative of a major slice of America in that year. That, more than most other paintings and artworks there, shows something that is relevant to what's happening today and it occupies the news in a major way. For too long, justice has seemed too lacking, and we saw it in Ferguson. Mr. Clay and I have worked together for display of this artwork. I questioned some professors on another issue, lawyers that specialized in First Amendment issues and speech issues in Judiciary Committee, and to a one, they said it appeared to be censorship and was wrong and was violative. Of course, there's some talk that, well, it's government speech and maybe that's different. But you know, some of the same people that have opposed this painting are the same people that say the rules should apply to Congress. Whatever laws we pass should apply to congressmen the same as they apply to other people, and we shouldn't have special privileges. But those people decided on their own to exempt a painting they found distasteful, which wouldn't have been prohibited anyplace else because of free speech. They violated their own precepts, the same precepts they may be violating today in other rooms where they're discussing a health bill that will exempt them from the health bill sanctions or requirements and not require them to possibly live, if they live in a state, to not have the essential benefits of the Affordable Care Act. So I rise today to commend Congressman Clay for his work, to thank him for his work with me and Senator Duckworth on the Police Training and Independent Review Act, which the need for is expressed here in this artwork. And that's why it's so important. This communicates a story. Beauty is wonderful, and a lot of the artwork is photographs and beauty. Nice, fine, places, fine. Content and ideas are more important. It's always more important to have artwork that challenges your mind and makes you think, what's this about? And as I look at this painting and I think about it, sure, there are a couple of police officers, two police officers in particular, in a certain manner of being displayed. But there's a third police officer on the right that's not shown the same way. And if you look at this painting, you see this painting says not all police officers are the same. Some are questionable, some aren't. And it revolved around a major incident in our city of St. Louis, one of our great cities, Ferguson, but the arch is in there and expresses that well. This painting should not have been removed. Congressman Clay is right to stand up for the First Amendment and for his constituent, and I urge my colleagues to help restore this painting to its rightful place in the Cannon Tunnel and to allow people to see it and make their own decisions. And with that, I thank you and appreciate being a part of this.
Let me also thank my friend from Tennessee who happens to be a member of the House Judiciary Committee, and as he stated, we are working together on police reform legislation, and I appreciate your service.
And I'm an art critic.
Yeah, you are an art critic. Mr. Speaker, at this time I would like to yield to my friend, a constitutional scholar and professor, Mr. Raskin from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Clay, thank you so much for convening us this evening to discuss this very important matter. Why is it so important? Well, we live in a time of rampant official lawlessness and disrespect for the Constitution of the United States. But I'm not here to talk about the Emoluments Clause or the power of Congress to declare war or about equal protection. I'm here to join my colleagues in talking about an incident of artistic discrimination committed by this institution, an assault on the First Amendment. Why is it so important? I was thinking about a professor I had who wrote a book about broken windows. And the thesis of the book basically was that if windows are broken in a neighborhood and nothing's done about it, it sends the message that you can go on to bigger and better things. In other words, petty crimes and misdemeanors unaddressed go on to become high crimes and misdemeanors. And when we started the 115th Congress, unfortunately, within the first week or two, we started with a broken constitutional window, Mr. Clay, because we tolerated, and we countenanced an act of vigilante discrimination and censorship by certain members against speech by the constituents of other members. So I want to tell the story to the people of America, especially the young people of America, who have open minds and open hearts. And I'm delighted that so many young people are in the chamber tonight to hear about what happened here, because this is a very important moment in the history of this institution. Now, I'm a professor of constitutional law by training. I did that for 25 years before I came to Congress. And I teach also the First Amendment. There are 6 rights contained in the First Amendment, and I hope all of you guys learn the 6 rights. They're the right to petition for a redress of grievances, the free exercise of religion, the right of assembly, the right of free press, the right of no establishment of religion, and then last but certainly not least, the right of freedom of speech. Here in Congress since 1982, we've had a congressional arts competition. It's a magnificent statement of American values. We invite members from every district in America. There are 435 districts here, plus 5 representatives who come from territories or the District of Columbia. So there's a total of 440 who are eligible. And each one impanels a group of artists, and they have a whole process, and the best artwork is adjudicated and then brought to Washington. And you can find them in the tunnel connecting the Cannon House office building to the Capitol building, to the chamber where we are right now. Hundreds of beautiful, extraordinary, interesting, vivacious, controversial paintings done by the young people of America. So what's the issue? Well, we're living in a time of political correctness. Let's say it plain. Sometimes the political correctness comes from the left. It happened recently at Berkeley in California, where the college canceled a planned appearance by Ann Coulter, a right-wing commentator whose views are totally anathema to me. But they canceled her speech. Now, in fairness to Berkeley, they said there had been violence there and they thought there might be violence again. But there was such a storm of outrage about this example of a kind of left-wing political correctness, they reversed the decision and they said she could come, and they understood it was their responsibility to make sure that her speech could proceed without being disrupted and broken up. So they did the right thing. But what are we experiencing here? Right where you sit in the Congress of the United States, in the House of Representatives, we are experiencing an example of right-wing political correctness run amok. Right-wing political censorship because some people didn't like somebody else's expression. And instead of walking on to the next painting, they decided to take it down, remove it, and return it to the office of Congressman Clay. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, but 5 times they took this painting down. And Congressman Clay and I wrote a letter to Speaker Ryan protesting this act of vigilante censorship right here in the Congress of the United States. And Speaker Ryan, instead of standing up for the First Amendment, instead of standing up for the speech and debate clause, instead of standing up for artistic expression, instead of standing up for freedom and teaching a lesson to the young people of America, he called the painting disgusting, and then initiated an official process whereby they censored it, and for the first time in the history of this competition, going back to 1982, 35 years, they censored a painting. Now, luckily, they've made this young artist one of the most famous artists in America now, and we can all wish him nothing but magnificent fortune as he goes ahead to develop his skills and his artistic voice. They were not able, I hope, to crush the spirit of this young man, but they did something really deeply injurious to the Republic of the United States. They engaged in an act of naked viewpoint discrimination against a work of art. Now, what are the constitutional values here that need to be vindicated? For artists like David Pulfis, or the winner from my district last year, Alana Van Horn, who did a self-portrait. Let's just be clear about one thing. These paintings hung for 6 months before the vigilante censors in the House of Representatives decided to come and take them down. For 6 months, they didn't harm anybody, they didn't hurt anybody, they didn't cause a riot, they didn't cause a ruckus, nothing. Until they decided somehow that this painting ran afoul of their political correctness litmus test for what's acceptable in Congress. So, what is really at stake here? Well, first of all, the rights of the member who sponsored this painting. And I want to say I am so impressed by the courage and the strength and the determination of Representative Clay to stand with his constituent and his constituency, as well as with the Constitution here. He brought a First Amendment lawsuit with Mr. Pulfis, not for money, not for damages, but for a preliminary and permanent injunction against congressional censorship of this painting. And so they went to court. They had a very simple argument. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. That's it. That's one of those 6 rights that I referenced when I opened my speech. Congress can't censor speech. Congress just censored speech. And the judge in the case, Judge Bates on the United States District Court, rendered a fascinating opinion. He found that this was indeed a clear case of viewpoint discrimination. It was censorship based on the views or the perspective of the artist. There was little doubt, he said, the government was engaged in a blatant act of viewpoint discrimination. And there are lots of cases that make clear that viewpoint discrimination is unacceptable in the United States, like Rosenberger versus University of Virginia, which said that UVA could not set up a program for young journalists and newspapers and magazines at UVA and exclude those from a religious point of view. The court said if you're going to set up a forum for speech like that, you can't single out one point of view and then suppress it. It was the same idea in Texas versus Johnson in 1995 when the Supreme Court said that the right to burn a flag as a political protest is constitutionally protected. You don't have to agree with it, but other people have the right to burn the flag if it's their flag. That's their property. And the court pointed out also that in America, flag burning is the proper mode of flag disposal. If you look at the flag treatment protocol, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts burn flags all of the time. So if you punish someone for burning a flag, you're punishing them for a thought crime. You're not punishing them for an action which is done all of the time in the United States. But in any event, the court says viewpoint discrimination is unacceptable. But nonetheless, Judge Bates said that Congressman Clay doesn't win. Why? It's because of where it took place. He said that the hallway in the Cannon House office building leading to the Capitol is not a public forum of any kind. It's not a traditional public forum like a street or park. It's not a limited public forum, something that's set up for the expression of speech, which is precisely what you would think it is. It's not even a non-public forum, Judge Bates says. He says that the 440 paintings down there are government speech. Now, that doesn't make any sense. We have lots of people who are in the gallery tonight. I assume you passed by these paintings on the way over. If you didn't, check them out. I challenge anybody in America to go down to the tunnel and look at the paintings and regard the magnificent diversity of views and perspectives embodied in this one painting, for example, and say that it's government speech. In fact, the reason it was censored is because it wasn't government speech. And yet, the court got it wrong. Now, I'm not going to say really nasty things about him. I'm not president of the United States. I'm not going to say that he's a non-judge or a so-called judger. I think that he made a serious mistake. I think the D.C. Circuit will reverse it. I think the U.S. Supreme Court would reverse it. But you know what? It doesn't make any difference because everyone who has the honor of serving in this chamber takes an oath to the Constitution of the United States, we've got to uphold the First Amendment. That's a responsibility that we've got. And we can't just say, oh, we'll let a court deal with it. We've got to deal with the First Amendment. And it's very clear, the court said it itself. This was viewpoint discrimination. That's unacceptable. And we should say that, yes, the Constitution applies in the Congress of the United States. We don't hold ourselves exempt from it. We don't say that if we set up a forum for our young artists to bring their paintings in that we're speaking. That doesn't make any sense. They're the ones speaking. Now, so where do we go from here? Well, we're appealing to Speaker Ryan and to our friends in the majority to back off of the regime of right-wing political correctness. Just like it was wrong for Berkeley to try to censor Ann Coulter, as much as many of us abhor everything she says and stands for, it is equally wrong for the Republican majority here to censor Mr. Polfus for your subjective interpretation of what his painting means. One of the reasons why the Supreme Court has always said you can't censor art is because art is polysemous. What does that mean? It means it's open to multiple possible significances. Who is to say what this painting means or what Guernica means? Guernica, by the way, would certainly be censored under the principles that are being advanced here because it's sensationalistic or it deals with contemporary controversy. I mean, what art doesn't deal with contemporary controversy? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense what they're saying. So I think that the majority should really rethink whether it wants to be in the business of censorship. This is not Russia. This is not Azerbaijan. This is not Saudi Arabia. This is not Iran. This is the United States of America. People have a right to paint the painting that they want. If you don't like the painting, you go to the next painting. You don't take it down. Especially in the Congress of the United States, where we should be setting an example. Justice Brandeis said, government is the omnipresent teacher to the people of the constitutional values of the whole society. And now we've got one other serious problem I want to mention before I go. Because you see, before they engaged in this act of censorship against this young artist from St. Louis, who was obviously upset about what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, and painted this painting, which I think is actually a very interesting, captivating painting that reminds me of Picasso's Guernica and clearly evokes themes from George Orwell's Animal Farm. But before they did that, you didn't have to agree with any particular painting or sculpture or artwork in the Capitol complex, right? We have great champions of freedom and justice and the Republic who are portrayed all over the Capitol complex, like Abraham Lincoln, for example, like Rosa Parks, like Martin Luther King, like Lyndon Johnson, like Sojourner Truth. But you know what? We also have people who are traitors to the country, people who were Confederate conspirators against the United States, like John Breckinridge, a guy who served as a U.S. Senator and as Vice President of the United States and then defected from the Union, took up arms against the United States of America, and was stripped of his, was declared a traitor and stripped of his titles as a former vice president and a former senator. Or Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, who there's a statue of him up. Robert E. Lee, obviously the general for the Confederacy during the Civil War. John C. Calhoun, who also defected from the Union and took up arms against us. And so we had these portraits and statues, these busts of great Americans who stood for freedom and justice and equality in America and the Constitution. And we had people who got themselves into trouble and I think brought disgrace to themselves with what they did, but they were all up together. Now that we're entering into a new era of authoritarian thought control and censorship and political correctness in Congress, how can we have a statue of John Breckinridge up in the Capitol complex? How can we have Jefferson Davis up in the Capitol complex? If this is government speech, now we're going to have to litigate each one of these artistic displays to see whether or not they're actually consistent with the values of the United States Congress and consistent with the values of the U.S. Constitution. Is that where we want to go? I invite my colleagues, I beseech my colleagues, don't take us there. Reverse this act of censorship against this young man. Don't set out to crush his spirit. Don't step on the First Amendment. Show America that we believe in the Constitution. But otherwise, we're going to be engaged in some very interesting discussions about the kinds of artwork that are found all over the Capitol campus. And I just want to salute again Congressman Clay for bringing us together and all of my colleagues who have come forward to stand up for the First Amendment tonight.
Let me thank my friend from Maryland who, as we heard, is 25 years of knowledge on the U.S. Constitution, bodes well for this entire body. And I appreciate his friendship and his support. Thank you. At this time, Mr. Speaker, would like to recognize the gentlewoman from Illinois, a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Ms. Schakowsky.
I thank the gentleman so much. I was sitting in my office and watching this debate and really appreciate the opportunity to come down. I ran down the stairs because I wanted to speak to this issue. Now, it really doesn't matter what anybody in here thinks about what I think is a pretty amazing piece of art. Under the banner of artistic discovery, that's the competition that we have, artistic discovery. We are inviting young people, high school students, to express themselves, sometimes to find themselves in the artwork that they do, to clarify ideas for themselves and to challenge people. What is art about, if not that? So in my office right now, we're putting together the artwork that's been submitted from the high schools in our district. We take very great pride in our artistic discovery contest. And so we're collecting that artwork. But as we looked at the instructions before we did it, we saw this new edition that just came up, first time. How long has this, 32 years, been doing this? This is the first year that it includes suitability guidelines. And it makes very clear that subjects of contemporary political controversy are not allowed. And then we have to sign, each member of Congress will be required to submit a letter of support for their work of art. This letter is to ensure that the member has seen the artwork before it is submitted, okay, has taken responsibility for the content and has certified that the artwork, in the member's opinion, adheres to the suitability guidelines. Now, of course, it says, well, it is not the intent to censor any artwork. We do wish to avoid artwork that that is potentially inappropriate for display in this highly traveled area leading to the Capitol. What the heck does that really mean? Does that mean that people are not, we have to worry about, is somebody going to take offense at something or say, ooh, I don't like that picture? They're entitled to do it, and the artist is entitled to put it out here. Now, it so happens that none of the pieces that were submitted, I think, were unsuitable, but who the heck knows anymore? Who makes the decision about what's unsuitable? I don't know. Some of the, if you look down the hall and look at some of them, some of those self-portraits, I don't know, these kids look troubled to me. Is that something that ought to be taken down? No, absolutely no. This young person lived through a traumatic incident in his community. And I think quite artistically decided to express his feelings about it. And I think it is absolutely an outrage. We already heard about the violation of the Constitution, but each and every American should be offended by that and about these suitability guidelines. I'm sorry, I object. I hope you do too, and I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentlewoman.
What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my friend from Missouri for yielding, and I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 280, resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 1694 to require additional entities to be subject to the requirements of Section 552 of Title V United States Code, commonly referred to as the Freedom of Information Act, and for other purposes, providing for consideration of motions to suspend the rules, and waiving a requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 with respect to consideration of certain resolutions reported from the Committee on Rules.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed.
Important than freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and I appreciate him letting me interrupt this afternoon.
Thank my friend from Georgia. And Mr. Speaker, at this time, would like to yield to my friend, the gentlelady and Dean of the Ohio delegation, Ms. Capter.
I thank you, Congressman Clay, for organizing this special order. And the people of Ohio in my district stand with you and with the young artist I will discuss in a moment. The United States of America and this Capitol stand as a symbol of American values and our freedoms. It just so happens I represent a district that contains 2 of the 10 finest museums in America at Cleveland and Toledo. We know a little bit about artistic expression. And here in the Capitol, we have created a place to gather and celebrate our nation's highest ideals, and first and foremost among these is the right of every citizen to freely express themselves as equal citizens. A recent act of censorship here at the Capitol placed this American right under threat, and it's important that all Americans think about this and know about it. I speak to say this action cannot be tolerated. I stand with my distinguished colleagues and with the American people to speak out against the removal of David Pulvis's award-winning painting from the United States Capitol. You know, there's a famous French artist named Edgar Degas who said, "Art is not what you see, but what you make others see." Surely, surely, David Pulvis's painting does this. And I support Mr. Pulvis's continued efforts to appeal a preliminary decision by the District of Columbia Federal Circuit Court that rejected his First Amendment legal claims, and that case will move forward. In May 2016, his extraordinary acrylic painting that reveals deep meaning, which he named Untitled Number 1, was awarded the prestigious honor to represent Missouri's 1st congressional district in the Congressional Arts Competition. I've entered for 3 decades works from my district in this competition. And just like the other 434 pieces selected to represent a congressional district in the annual competition, Untitled 1 was approved and accepted by the architect of the Capitol for public display inside our Capitol. For over 26 weeks, Untitled 1 hung in the underground tunnel between the Capitol and the Cannon House Office building, and for over 180 days. There was no controversy, and for more than half a year, citizens and members of Congress, congressional staff, thousands and thousands of international and national visitors passed by and viewed it with no concern. But that changed abruptly when, in fact, a member from the Republican side of the aisle, I think likely violated the law and pulled it off the wall in the Capitol of the United States, and it didn't belong to him. But he did that. And I dare say that gentleman missed the deeper meaning of what this young man has portrayed. There was an added twist of irony in that the censorship moment occurred one day after our national holiday honoring civil rights icon, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. The censorship sent a woeful and chilling message to our nation, and one that says that our young people's voices and their thoughts are not respected. I say that's un-American. Their views and experiences and perspectives must be valued. when we look at what was done, his freedom of expression, even when expressed through a juried competition, is not protected in the top site of liberty's essence, the legislative branch inside the United States Capitol building. So members of Congress have to take a stand. We must demand that the creative contributions of Americans, young and old, in the arts are embraced, including inside this Capitol. We cannot tolerate actions that directly and unjustly stifle or threaten an artist's artistic point of view. That is what America is all about. David Pulfus's painting won the honor to represent Missouri's 1st Congressional District because it reflects an important, compelling message. His work reminds us of the value of the arts in a free society. The painting was inspired by the civil unrest that occurred in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, and it depicts the racial confrontation that ensued with police after that fatal shooting of the unarmed teen, Michael Brown, Jr. This is a complex work, and it does not deserve anyone's rejection. It tells us about ourselves and our society so that we face it fully. And if you look at it, there are serious messages in here that say stop the killing, racism kills. It talks about history. And if you really look at it and you see that some of those involved in the killing, there is no right side. One of the perpetrators is portrayed as a wolf. It's very interesting to study the deeper meaning, and the painting includes challenging images, a man being crucified, wearing a graduation cap, holding the scales of justice. This is a young man, he's not even 20 years old. Thinking about this, a horned beast in a police uniform tangling with a devil with a pointed tail. Looks like a wolf. And demonstration signs that read history and stop the killing. Simply put, this commanding work of art from a teenager is a true testament to the power and immeasurable significance of our nation's young artists who express us. The debate sparked by its removal from the Capitol is about something larger than the artwork itself. It's about defending our fundamental First Amendment freedom. This right to artistic expression is considered objectionable by a few and applauded by the vast majority of Americans who understand what free expression in this society is about. Neither the architect of the Capitol nor a member of Congress has the right to censor, self-censor citizens based on their political points of view, whether in the name of official decorum or because they find it offensive or because they fail to grasp its deep meaning. In America, if you do not like a painting you see in a display, you simply move on to the next one. You don't take it down. It doesn't belong to you. Nevertheless, as a painter myself and citizen who deeply reveres our constitutional rights, I'm confident that in this case, justice ultimately will prevail, and Untitled #1 will soon resume its rightful place inside our Capitol. Because a young man with this depth of expression is proudly an American. For if it doesn't come back, I fear for the slippery slope the architect of the Capitol has begun, and it is not worthy of us as Americans. I want to thank Congressman Clay so very much for standing by this young American who's not even 18 years old yet, I don't think, and who managed to put this complex piece of art together. I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud of our country, and I just know that working together, we're going to get it right for artistic expression here in the House of Representatives. And I yield back the gentleman his time.
And I thank the gentlewoman from Ohio. I certainly appreciate your support. And in closing, let me say that the student artist in question, my constituent David Pulfus, is a great young man. He is academically gifted, artistically talented, and is now a freshman in college. He is doing everything that we encourage young Americans to do to become successful citizens. His winning entry is a colorful, symbolic representation of the great anger, pain, frustration, and deep deficit in trust for local law enforcement that many young African Americans feel in their hearts. The painting also reflects generations of struggle, sacrifice, abuse of power, and tenuous relationships between minorities and a system of justice that still provides equal justice for some, but not for all. So the larger, much more fundamental question is, why does this young American feel that way? And what can we do as leaders of a compassionate and just nation to finally remedy that? I am so thankful for the remarkable public service of my exceptional pro bono legal team who are guiding this case, including Dr. Lawrence Tribe of Harvard University School of Law, Dr. Erwin Chemerinsky of the University of California at Irvine School of Law, and the others.
Time has expired.
As a member of Congress who reveres the Constitution, I am confident that freedom and justice will prevail, and I thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, for your indulgence.